Alright, so we're up to week 8, and obviously this is 106. So, Dan, you're first up. And yeah, nice job with Spike. You've got a nice composition within the image in terms of the road wandering away, which is cool. And you've manipulated Spike's head in quite an interesting, surreal way. Cleaned up noses and bits and pieces, which is all good, and I can't see any artifacts. The one thing I would do is just brighten up, and I've just put a very wide halo on that adjustment layer, but I would brighten up Spike and just the face so that it blends in better with the rest of the image. At the moment it's a bit on the dark side, but that's a relatively minor thing. We haven't really started talking about lighting, but having said that, it is good to see that you have Spike looking into the light, and that's one thing that I will give feedback on, but it's not marked on this week. You've got the right idea that you're playing around with the light as well, and great to see you using your own images. Right, Adrian. So yeah, that's an interesting place to put Spike. And I can see the logic for putting them on the him, her, it, on the windowsill in terms of dealing with the lighting, particularly the reflection off the chin. However, the surface is actually darker than the chin, so what I would have done is grabbed your adjustment brush and gone through and pulled back those highlights, and then you're going to have to chuck a little bit more colour back in there as well. So there's a number of ways of doing it. One would be to use this colour colour temperature tool. One would be to go in and add some colour into this selection, which is an interesting one to try and particularly nail, because the colour can end up being more or less intense. You don't have a great way of changing it, but what you can do, and you will cover that shortly, is how to recolor photos, and that's coming up in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that one. I like the idea of putting the reflection in. You've moved it a little bit too far for where the reflection would actually be. I'd pull it back a little bit more, and you can do that. I'd be tempted to try and put a reflection into the other window as well. Difficult to do, maybe not worth it, but would have kind of just completed that story. Well, would have completed the look of putting the Spike on the windowsill. I think to finish the story off, you possibly needed to do something like chucking Spike's head in a plant pot, which would have looked quite ridiculous, but quite funny at the same time. Whereas the head just sitting on the windowsill doesn't quite make sense to me, and isn't as strong a story as you could potentially get. But good job for using your own window, and great job of thinking about the lighting. By the way, if you really did want the lighting to match, you actually needed quite a strong sunlight or sunset coming in, more on this angle than the diffuse overcast day that you've got. But hey, it's early days when we're dealing with lighting at the moment. Oh, I forgot to say, I had to double check and grab the original Spike out to see what you'd done in terms of actual manipulation, and you've done it quite subtly, but it is still there, so that's fine from that point of view. Right, Kenny, let's have a look at your one, and there's quite a funny story in here. I like where you're going with it. In terms of the image that you've used, great to see that you've put the reference there, but that's not APA formatting. APA formatting needs to include things like who the author is, and the name of the title, and all the other bits and pieces. So go back to that PDF, and if you're stuck on it, then drop me an email, and I suggest you have a practice at renaming it using that PDF. And if you're still stuck, well, if you want to check that you've done it correctly, drop me an email with it in, and I will get back to you on that one. In terms of the Puppet Warp tool, not quite worked. You've got something that's happened with the head that looks like the hairlines detached a little bit. And while you've done some of the cleaning up and the transition there's still bits and pieces that are floating around, and there's a bit of the hair that's not really been masked properly, and this transition between the Spike's neck and the boy's neck needs a little bit more work done to it. The other thing to watch out for is your background image has pixelated quite badly. Now, looking at the source image, it's high enough resolution that shouldn't matter, as long as you don't resize it, make it really small, and then highly compress it. So when you're doing your saving for the final version, just make sure that you are using the highest resolution, not highest resolution, but highest 100% no compression. Otherwise you end up with this type of pixelation and halos and things happening around, and that's something you want to try and avoid. The other thing to be aware of, and although it works in this image in a way because we've got that storyline going between the Spike and the Spike head on the boat, is you don't want to reuse the same image twice within an image, because the human eye spots those type of things and it tends to make the story a little bit less efficient. And also, if you're going to go to this extent of changing things like this, it's worth changing things like sticking the reflection on, and obviously we haven't covered that, but it's little things like that really make it. And of course we'll get to lighting and as we go as well, but just be aware that you really should be looking for images where the lighting matches. So if the light should be coming from this direction and shining on the person, then of course that head facing into the image again, and to the left is not going to work because it should have light coming around the back. But that's alright, that's all stuff that we'll cover as we go, and this one's just to get you used to being able to use the Creative Commons and practice the masking, and get you used to using the Puppet Warp and practice the masking. And for those of you who haven't used your own images, start practicing that APA referencing as well. Right, Chirper, let's have a look at yours, and your APA referencing is spot on. Well done, good job on that one. The only hold on, sorry, almost spot on. Yep, comma, dot, comma, dot. You don't have to you don't write the full person's full name. It's just you write the surname in full, comma, and then the initial. But other than that, the rest of it's fine, and that's close enough for this point. As you go on, we expect you to get better at it, but that's right. So story-wise, yeah, kind of. I'm not quite seeing the relationship between the snow and the person. I think had you gone and stuck Spike on a body that was in snow gear, or you'd put snow on Spike's head and stuck her further down the image, then that might have worked better. You have, however, got the composition pretty good. Spike's looking into the image, which is nice. I wouldn't, however, use the border, and the reason for that is we'll go to the full screen. It's a little bit easier to see. With borders, particularly white ones, they tend to drag your attention out of the image, and generally the best rule of thumb is if you have to put a border on something, and that's because often it's a predominantly black image, and you put a very thin white border on so it can go on a black background without bleeding in and losing it into the rest of the background. But yeah, big thick white borders tend not to be so good because they will draw our attention away to the border and away from everything else. So in terms of the masking, not done a bad job. There's just a couple of bits here with the edge of the nose has a little bit of black around it, and a little bit of cleanup that could have happened around the hair. In terms of the cleanup of Spike, you cleaned up some of the neck, some of the ears still missing, and the tears are still there, and as they haven't been integrated into the story, then yeah, that's cleanup that could have still been done, but your resizing is all spot on, which is good to see. Right, Rebecca, well, I cracked up laughing when I saw this one, so that's always a good start. Spike's eyes are bigger than its stomach. It has no stomach. Yeah, that works. So yeah, nicely chosen in terms of the image. In terms of later stuff, then it's worth noting that the lighting doesn't match, but that's right. The lighting for the Spike one is never going to really match, which is why we're not really worried about it. The puppet warp manipulation that you've done, pretty good, particularly in terms of making those eyes pop. However, do watch out for the artifacts like this peak of, kind of looks like I'm pinching it now, of skin there. There's a double lump of on the lip here, and this lip is quite sharp, which doesn't quite work. And in terms of the masking, you've done a pretty good job of most of it. There's just a bit here, and the tears aren't cleaned up from the original. Though you've done some work to clean up the dirt down here, and some work on the ears, but it's not quite convincing. It's getting there. In terms of your APA referencing, you've almost nailed it. You just need a square bracket saying with the word image inside it after picnic. And other than that, you've done quite well, so good job. Right, okay, so you've used your own background images on this one, which is fair enough. In terms of the story, I'm slightly missing it. The idea of Spike sitting on the vase kind of works, but then the flowers slash greenery that you've got in there kind of needs to actually tie in with it, as does the background of light. It's not just it shouldn't just be a case of popping them there because you like the image. They need to work with each other somehow, and they do from a colour point of view, but it's not quite strong enough. In terms of your puppet warp, you've certainly done the puppet warping. There are a few bumps and things in Spike that don't really make sense. There's a bit of his forehead, its forehead missing, and the chin. And in terms of your masking and stuff, the butterfly, sticking it over there as a join is a great idea, but you need to make sure that you've masked this well, and you've ended up with holes in the wing, which, okay, I could see work if they were going to allow us to see through to Spike, but they don't. And Spike shouldn't just stop, and neither should the vase, so it's yeah, not quite behaving itself from that point of view. And in terms of the cleaning, looks like you've cleaned up most of the neck, but in doing the ear you've ended up with a bump in there, and the tear is still a little bit present. Your referencing, because you've used your own images, is fine, and your image size is all good. So yeah, it's there. Just actually think about the story that you're trying to tell, and be careful with your masking to make sure that you're doing it as realistically as possible. Right, Tricia, let's have a look at... Oh, yeah, I did get the right person, sorry. Let's have a look at yours. So, your Spike, you've done a nice job of putting her onto a human body. In terms of the crop, lose a bit more off this side so that you're actually getting it to look into the image, and in terms of the cloning, there's a bit more work that needs to happen around the bottom here and here, just so that transition really looks real. You've done a nice job trying to change that skin tone between the two, which is good. The one thing that will help a lot is if you've actually got lighting that matches, and in this case obviously the light's coming from this side of Spike, therefore you need even more light on this person, and have them actually holding their head in the same direction. I suspect this original shot they were facing a bit more straight forward, and that's caused you a little bit of grief trying to get this side sorted. But anyway, that's not been marked for this. It's only the cloning part of it that's really let you down on there. But it's only a minor tweak at this point. As you go on the course, we expect things to get better. And the fact that you've used your images and clearly have stated so, then that's fine. That gives you full marks for that part too. So nicely done. Right, Brent, let's have a look at yours. Well, I'm missing the story of this one. You've used a background, but it's not relating to Spike in any particular way, and you've not made the manipulation do anything that's matching the background in any way. So when you're doing this type of Photoshop work, when you're doing any type of Photoshop work, it should have a purpose. So it's something to make sure that you consider whenever you're formulating something. You've popped Spike on the thirds. There's not the eyes are actually on the half rather than the third, so I would have given Spike a bit more room. But we are at least drawn into the center of the image with the vignette that's on the background naturally, which is good. And you have applied the puppet warp. Be careful, because you do have a black line that's appeared at the front, and there's some cloning marks from when you're doing some of the cleanup of Spike there as well, which would be a good idea to keep an eye on. In terms of the link that you provided, that's not the link. It needs to be a link that I can copy and paste into Blackboard, not just a link to click and follow. Now, the click and follow one did work, which is useful, but and I'll grab it in a second. But you actually need to have that whole URL, so that if I copy and paste it in, if I copy and paste this text in, it will still work, even if the active link gets lost. The other thing to watch for is that the name of this image is black background with ornaments and flourishes, not 2013 dash, etc. That's one problem, but the biggest problem is that this has been shared publicly, but it is not a copyright-free image. There is nothing on the photo details that says that this is free for reuse. Now, if you've found evidence somewhere else, then that's the case. That's fine. I'm quite happy for you to drop me an email and clarify that. But in the future, you need to make sure that you're actually finding images that have the correct copyright. Now, whether or not that's one of the Creative Commons ones or another one, that's fine. But just because somebody shares an image publicly, i.e. you can see it, does not make it available for reuse without asking permission for the person, and you don't have time to go and do that for these assignments. You need to go and find images that already state that they're free to use. Right, Louise, well, I really like this image, and I really like what you've done with it. The problem is that I can't see what you've done to Spike using the Puppet Warp tool, which is one of the key pieces to this image, or to this assignment, and yeah, it's just missing. I've compared the two, zoomed in, and I cannot see what you've done to distort Spike's head. I can see that you've gone and put new hair in and all the other bits and pieces. You've had a go at cleaning up the tears and stuff. There's still a bit of a mess there, just in terms of the skin texture. It looks a bit rough and dark, but I'm missing what you've done in terms of actually doing the face. So if you can drop me an email when you've redone it, or drop me an email to explain what you did with the Puppet Warp tool, then I can update your grade on that one. Right, Rex, let's have a look at yours. Well, your APA referencing is all spot on, which is good to see. I can kind of see where you're going with this story, but the faces really probably needed to be turned round the other way, because that's the direction that you've got the light happening from. I can kind of see why you've... part of me wonders why you didn't actually just replace the Buddha's head with Spike. Sacrilegious, I know, but well, you've replaced the top of the temple, so obviously that's not really the problem. And to make it look fully realistic, you probably needed Spike's head facing the other direction to match the light, but they're not facing the right way anyway, so that point goes out the window. Yeah, it doesn't quite work for me in terms of story, and these three are nicely positioned, but this one's just a bit too big, and the top of the head's cropped off and facing out the image. I wonder if you could have got away with shrinking Spike at least to the point that it was able to see, that not have the head chopped off, or maybe even crop the image down so that that no longer becomes an issue. The puppet warp that you've done, pretty much just wiping out that neck, which, yeah, let's face it, needed to happen to make them sit on the plinths, which is good. What I would have done was made a copy of the top of the bells, plinth, tower thing, masked out the edge of that, and then put that on exactly the same location over the top, and that would give you a nice clean line rather than having this patch of white and the edge of Spike's neck overflowing over that section. I do like how you've managed to change the colour to match the other image, and in fact, looking at the original image, you've changed the colour temperature to make it warmer as well, and that certainly helps the overall feel of the image. Melanie, I'm afraid you've uploaded the wrong image, so I can't give you any feedback on that one. Right, Shireen, let's have a look at yours, and yeah, there's some story going on there. It's not quite as strong as it could be because you've used an abstract background, and you've not changed Spike to really fit into that background a lot. He looks, or it looks, slightly nervous with the lip being pulled in, which actually, yeah, kind of does give you that sense of scaredness. So, but in terms of the composition, sticking heads and things in the middle of an image is not a great idea, although you have got this abstract actually drawings into the middle, so that, yeah, it's not great composition, but I can see that has helped. Be careful with your masking. Again, this gets more and more important as you go along. It's quite soft down here, and it's not quite smooth enough over the nose. You've done a nice job on the hair there, but there's a little bit of a bit on this back of the head that just needs to probably just paintbrush and go in and clean up the mask there to get rid of that black line. And Spike, in terms of the cleanup, you've done a little bit of work down here, but the ear still needs doing, and the tear, unless you're going to do something and make a tear drop down here and actually make it part of the image, just doesn't really feel like it's adding anything to it. So the tears could have been cleared off as well. Alright, so that's it for me this week. I'm going to be getting stuck into marking portfolios and stuff for first intake, so if you've got emails for me, drop them through. I will get them answered as quickly as I can, but I may be a little bit slower than normal. And in terms of remarking and stuff, I won't be doing any remarks until well after I've got all the portfolios done. So yeah, if you've been granted an extension this week, or you've messed up and have a resubmit, then my apologies. I will get them done, but it will not be particularly quickly, because I've got a deadline to get through for the other intake students, so that they're ready to go and have their marks before intake 3 starts, which is in a couple of weeks. Okay guys, I hope you're having fun and learning heaps. Catch you later. Bye.